Rain hammered the rusted roof of the old cabin like the desperate fingers of the dead. The forest beyond the clearing was quiet, too quiet for a world still full of living things. But Daniel Harper knew better. The living had long since vanished. He sat hunched over a shortwave radio, knuckles white around the dial. Static. More static. A whisper. His heart surged. "This is Station 47, if you can hear this, there's still time." The voice was faint, crackling under layers of noise and interference. He scrambled for his battered journal, flipping past pages of scrawled survival notes and hastily drawn maps. "Station 47, he muttered, circling the name. "I thought they were gone." The broadcast cut off. Daniel stared at the radio. That voice was the first human sound he'd heard in 92 days. He knew the number exactly, he'd carved it into the wooden beam above the fireplace every morning. He had survived when no one else had. He had seen cities fall, seen the skinless things that walked like men. He had learned what it meant to run, to starve, to kill. But he hadn't heard a voice in 3 months. Not a real one. Before the fall, Daniel had been nobody, an overworked mechanic in a small town, scraping by. He'd hated the monotony. But now? Now he craved it. The first signs of the outbreak had seemed distant: rumors, internet videos, a growing number of missing persons. Then came the screams, the sirens, the lockdowns that didn't work. The media called it the Red Hunger. No cure. No vaccine. Just infection, transformation, and endless hunger. Daniel had fled north when the roads were still passable. He'd made it to the cabin, his grandfather's old hunting lodge, with a backpack and a shotgun. He'd watched the world burn from behind boarded-up windows. He thought he was the only one left. That night, sleep didn't come easily. The wind howled, and something skittered across the roof, too light for a person, too deliberate for an animal. He didn't move. He just waited, listening. Then a scream tore through the forest. Not human. Not even close. A wet, gurgling moan that rose and fell like a dying siren. Daniel sat up, shotgun in hand. His eyes scanned the darkness outside the narrow window. There, between the trees, a figure. No, not one, 3. Pale. Limping. Their movements were jerky, unnatural. But what chilled Daniel to the bone wasn't the sight of them. It was the fact that they were heading away from the cabin. Toward something else. Toward the source of the broadcast. His stomach turned. Could it be a trap? Could someone, something, be luring survivors with a fake signal? Or worse, was it real, and the infected had heard it too? By morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained an ashen gray. Daniel packed quickly: rifle, ammo, water, canned beans, a flashlight, and the journal. The voice on the radio had said, "Station 47. That was it. No coordinates. No further details. He would have to follow the signal. He climbed the small hill behind the cabin, radio in hand, twisting the antenna higher with each step. The static was relentless until, a whisper again. "Station, safe, no biters inside, north of Red Pines." Red Pines. That was something. A park, maybe? A ranger station? He opened the map and found it, 3 days' walk if he moved fast and avoided the roads. He had to go. Daniel set out by noon. The forest was a gauntlet of silence and rot. The occasional crow broke the stillness, but even they seemed hesitant, flitting from tree to tree like shadows on parole. He stuck to the game trails, ears sharp for the telltale wheeze of the infected. The creatures didn't breathe like normal people. They sniffed, constantly. A dry, dog-like sound that pierced the quiet. By dusk, he reached a small creek. He was about to fill his canteen when he saw the first corpse. It lay sprawled on the bank, face down. Dressed in military gear. A patch read RP Patrol. Red Pines. Daniel crouched and turned the body over with his boot. The soldier's face was intact, no bite marks. His throat, however, had been cut. Not the work of the infected. That's when he heard the rustle. He spun, rifle raised. Someone was watching him. The trees were too thick to see clearly, but movement flickered at the edge of his vision. A silhouette. Not staggering like a biter. Controlled. Quiet. Human. "Hey!" Daniel shouted. "I heard the broadcast. Station 47. No answer. Just the wind again. Then, another sound. Not the moan of the dead. A click. Mechanical. Like a walkie-talkie. Then they vanished. Daniel stood alone by the corpse, heart pounding. The message might be real. But someone didn't want him to reach it. Daniel's pulse drummed in his ears as he scanned the trees. He tightened his grip on the rifle, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Whoever, or whatever, was watching him, he couldn't afford to take chances. The infected were bad enough, but something told him that the person in the woods wasn't one of them. They were far more dangerous. He slowly backed away from the creek, keeping his eyes locked on the shifting shadows. Every crackle of a branch underfoot, every distant whisper of wind, made him jump. His senses were stretched thin, as taut as the bowstring on his rifle. But it was no use. Whoever it was had already gone. With his heart pounding in his chest, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to reach Station 47. There was something in that broadcast that had drawn him in. The brief mention of no biters inside echoed in his mind. What did it mean? Were there survivors holed up there? Could it be a safe haven? Taking a deep breath, he moved quickly but cautiously, making his way through the dense forest. The trail was faint but distinct. This part of the woods was less traversed by animals and the occasional human. The trees loomed tall, like towering sentinels, their branches creaking under the weight of the storm clouds still hanging overhead. There was no sound. Not a bird. Not even the rustle of the underbrush. The silence was suffocating. After an hour of trekking through the wilderness, Daniel stopped to check his bearings. He pulled out the map again, noting the proximity of red pines, a few more miles, and he would be close to the coordinates. The radio signal, faint as it had been, seemed to be getting stronger. It felt as if he was finally getting closer to some kind of answer, and that thought was the only thing keeping him moving forward. The nightfall had turned the forest into a twisted labyrinth of shadow and fog. He wasn't sure how much further he could go before exhaustion overcame him. He had to find shelter. That's when he heard it. A low growl, deep in the woods. It was too guttural to be human. Too quick and savage to be an animal. Something large. Something hungry. Daniel's body went rigid. The sound was moving closer. No, two sounds, circling him. And they were getting louder. He spun in place, raising his rifle, his breath coming in shallow bursts. Then, he saw them. Eyes. Two pairs. Yellow and bloodshot, glowing faintly through the darkness. They were perched on either side of the trees, watching him, waiting. Not zombies, Daniel realized. He knew the infected too well. Their eyes were dull, lifeless, like black pits. But these were different. They were more alert, more aware. Before he could react, the first one lunged, fast and silent, breaking through the brush like a shadow with fangs. Instinct took over. Daniel fired. The shot rang out in the still air, echoing across the trees. The figure crumpled to the ground with a twisted scream that echoed through his bones. But the second one didn't hesitate. It sprang from the darkness, its elongated limbs snapping forward like an animal's. It was human once. That much Daniel could tell. But now it was something else, skin stretched tight over bone, face distorted by hunger and rage. Its teeth were yellowed and sharp. This was no average infected. Daniel fired again, but it was too close. The shot missed. The creature was already on him. He struggled, pushing the rifle against the thing's chest. The rancid stench of decay filled his nose as he pushed back, trying to shove it off. The thing's grip tightened around his throat. He could feel the desperation in its movement, the frantic hunger of something that had been starved too long. With a final, desperate effort, Daniel twisted his body and swung his leg up, kicking the creature off him. It stumbled back, momentarily dazed. He took advantage of the gap, raising his rifle and firing. This time, the bullet hit its mark. The creature's head exploded in a burst of blood and gore, and it collapsed into a pile of lifeless flesh. Daniel took a moment to steady his breath, the reality of what had just happened settling in. He'd killed it, hadn't hesitated. It was survival. Always survival. He checked the body quickly. The thing wasn't carrying anything useful, just the tattered remains of a jacket and a faded military patch, identical to the soldier he'd found by the creek. As he gathered himself, the low growl sounded again. This time, it was closer. Daniel's eyes darted toward the sound, but there was no more time for hesitation. He had to keep moving. He had no idea if more of these creatures were lurking in the woods or if the forest was their hunting ground, but he couldn't stick around to find out. His feet carried him forward with an urgency he hadn't felt in days. Each step was heavier than the last, but he couldn't stop. Station 47. The voice on the radio. The promise of safety. He pushed on. By dawn, Daniel found himself standing at the edge of a clearing, the first light of morning creeping through the trees. In the distance, barely visible through the haze, he saw a structure. A small building, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation. It was exactly where the radio signal had led him. His heart surged. He was close. So close. But just as he began to make his way toward the building, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. Someone else, was already there. Daniel froze. The figure standing at the edge of the clearing was tall, cloaked in a tattered brown coat that billowed like a specter in the faint morning light. For a moment, neither of them moved, just two people staring at each other from across the desolate space. A strange tension hung between them, the air thick with the unspoken truth. Survival was a fragile thing, and trust was an even more delicate thread. The stranger's silhouette didn't flinch. The rifle in Daniel's hands felt heavier now, as if the weight of the moment was pushing down on him. "Who are you?" Daniel called out, his voice hoarse from the sleepless nights and the cold air. His grip on his rifle tightened, but he didn't raise it, yet. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they turned slightly, as if measuring Daniel's movements, before taking a single step toward him. The eyes, dark and unreadable beneath a hood, watched him with an unsettling intensity. Daniel's mind raced. Could this be a trap? Were there other survivors here, and was this just another person trying to lure him into danger? Or perhaps, was this the one who had been broadcasting that cryptic signal, Station 47? "I'm not here to cause trouble," Daniel tried again, his words coming out sharper than he intended. He wasn't sure why he felt this pressing need to explain himself to a stranger who could very well be as dangerous as the infected roaming the land. The figure stopped, then slowly lifted a hand. In the dim light, Daniel could see it, clutching something. A walkie-talkie. The same kind he had seen the day before the radio broadcast had flickered on. The stranger pressed the button on the side. "You're not alone," a voice crackled through the device. It was the same voice from the radio, that fleeting broadcast from Station 47. "You found it. Good. Get inside, now." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The voice was familiar but strained, as if whoever was speaking hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. There was something desperate about it, a kind of urgency that stirred something deep in his chest. He lowered the rifle a fraction, but he didn't let his guard down. The stranger, still watching him, gave a small nod. Without another word, they turned, walking toward the dilapidated building. Daniel hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to run, to leave this place and never look back. But the voice, that voice, it had been the first sign of hope in months. He couldn't ignore it. Not now. He followed. The station was smaller than Daniel had imagined. It was nothing more than a single-story, boxy building surrounded by the remains of a broken fence and overgrown weeds. The windows were boarded up, and the walls were peeling, but it still stood. The radio transmission had said this place was safe, but safe was a word Daniel hadn't used in months. Inside, the air was musty and stale. The lights were flickering, on the verge of dying out completely. There was a low hum in the background, like machinery left running too long. A man sat in the far corner, hunched over a desk cluttered with papers, maps, and strange gadgets. He didn't look up as the door opened. His fingers moved in a constant blur, sorting through wires and tangled equipment. "You're late," he muttered, his voice dry and raspy. Daniel blinked. "What?" "You're late. The others are already on their way. You must have encountered some trouble on the way here." The man's eyes, gray and tired, finally met Daniel's. There was no warmth in them, only the cold calculation of someone who had been surviving for far too long. "Come in, take a seat. I'm not sure how much longer the comms will hold up." Daniel didn't move. His grip on the rifle loosened, but he was still on edge. "Who are you?" The man raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here, and you heard the broadcast. That's all that counts now." "Then you're Station 47? Daniel's voice dropped, skeptical. "I thought you were a group. I thought this was a refuge." "Refuge?" The man's laugh was bitter, a dry rasp that barely escaped his cracked lips. "A refuge? I don't have time for dreams. This place was never meant to be a refuge. It's a station, a warning system. We send out messages, signals, hoping someone will get them. Hoping someone will come. And you came. So congratulations. You're the last one." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "The last one?" The stranger nodded. "Yep. We've been sending out messages for weeks, but no one's answered. We're just waiting now. Waiting for things to get worse." Daniel's mind was racing. The last one? But the broadcast had said. "Are you saying there's no one else left?" The man gave him a long, unreadable look. "Not unless you count the walkers." He glanced toward the windows where the shadows of the trees pressed against the glass. "There's no safe haven left. Just this. And a lot of people who were too stubborn to leave before the infected came. We're just trying to survive long enough to figure out what happens next." Daniel's thoughts churned. This place wasn't a safe haven. It was a dead end. And yet, the feeling of hopelessness that had gnawed at him for weeks began to ebb, just a little. There was someone here. Someone who might have a plan. He had to know more. He had to trust something, anything. "Is there any chance of escaping?" Daniel asked, barely above a whisper. The man's eyes flickered. "Escape?" He leaned forward, a harsh light catching his features. "We've all been trying to escape, friend. The world ended a long time ago. The dead don't need to follow us. The real danger? It's already inside these walls." Daniel stood frozen in the dim light, the weight of the man's words sinking into him like stones in a deep well. The real danger? It's already inside these walls. The stranger's gaze never wavered, but his eyes were distant now, haunted, like a man who had seen too much and was afraid to see even more. "Inside?" Daniel repeated, his voice barely a whisper. His fingers gripped the rifle tighter, his knuckles aching. "What do you mean, inside?" The man looked away, his gaze drifting to the radio equipment and the makeshift antennas cluttering the table. "The dead, they're easy to fight. But the living? They're the real monsters. The infected out there? They're just puppets. The real threat is the people still breathing." Daniel's heart sank. It was exactly what he feared. The world had been consumed by chaos, and now even the remaining survivors had become something twisted, something unrecognizable. The idea of trying to rebuild, of trying to survive with others, was slipping further away from reality. "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, trying to break through the man's wall of detachment. What happened here? You've been broadcasting those messages, but you've been hiding something, haven't you? The man looked back at him, eyes narrowing. You think you came here to find answers? To fix things? He scoffed bitterly. The truth is, there's nothing left to fix. It's all been broken. There's nothing you can do to save us. We're just holding on, like everyone else. Daniel's thoughts raced. So that's it? We just wait? Wait until the world dies completely? The man shook his head, as if the question was beneath him. You really don't get it, do you? We've been surviving in the only way we know how. But out there, things are different now. People like me, we've learned to play the game. The infected don't matter anymore. It's the people who are the danger now. We've become them. We've learned how to survive, by any means necessary. Daniel stepped back, a chill running down his spine. You're saying that there's something worse than the infected? The man smiled bitterly, his lips curling in a twisted parody of amusement. Oh, yes. There are those who've embraced the new world. People who saw the end as an opportunity, not a tragedy. They've become predators. They don't care about safety. They care about power. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. Daniel felt a knot tighten in his stomach. How do you know all this? Because, the man said, finally meeting his gaze again, I've seen them. I've been in their camp. I've learned how they think, how they operate. They call themselves the exiles. And they'll kill anyone who stands in their way. The air in the small room felt suddenly too tight, too heavy. Daniel's mind reeled. The exiles. He had heard whispers of such groups, bands of survivors who had abandoned any sense of morality. He had thought they were just rumors. But this man, he was living proof. Where are they now? Daniel asked, his voice low. Are they close? The stranger's eyes darkened. They're always close. The exiles aren't just a group, they're a network. They've been watching, waiting for weakness. And when they find it, they'll strike. If you're smart, you'll leave before they do. Daniel clenched his jaw, the weight of the decision crashing down on him. He had come this far, through the thick of the infected, just to find this place. The last sign of life. And now, it seemed, he was standing on the precipice of something far more dangerous than the zombies outside. You said there was no hope left, Daniel said slowly, his thoughts a swirl of uncertainty. Is that true? Are we all just waiting to die? The man's gaze softened, just for a moment, before he nodded. In a way, yes. But there are still some who are trying to fight. Not just against the exiles, but against everything. Some of us are trying to build something here. A defense. A way to survive. Daniel's brow furrowed. Survive? You're saying there's hope? Not hope, the man said, the bitterness creeping back into his voice. Just survival. You don't get to have hope in this world anymore. Hope doesn't feed you. Hope doesn't protect you from what's out there. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He wasn't sure he believed the man's words. Could anyone really survive this kind of world? Was there any point in clinging to the idea of safety, when everything around them was crumbling? Before he could respond, the door to the station creaked open, and the stranger at the table stiffened. A woman stepped inside, her face covered by a scarf, her eyes hard and wary. She didn't speak, but her presence alone sent a chill down Daniel's spine. She carried herself like someone who had seen too many horrors and had learned to shut out the rest of the world in order to survive. You found him, the woman said flatly, her voice calm but laced with suspicion. She eyed Daniel with an intensity that felt more like an interrogation than a greeting. The broadcast was a risk. And now he's here. He's not like the others, the man replied, his voice guarded. He heard the message. He came here. He deserves to know what's going on. The woman's eyes flickered to Daniel, sizing him up. And what do you think you know about this world? About survival? Daniel opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He was tired of running. Tired of fighting alone. But could he trust these people? The stranger had already shown him how far the darkness had crept into humanity. Was this woman just another part of the machine? Before he could decide, the ground beneath them trembled. It was faint at first, like the aftershock of a distant explosion. But then it came again, stronger this time. The walls of the station creaked as if something outside was pushing against them. The woman's eyes widened. They're here. The tremor in the ground surged again, shaking the old station walls like the tremors of a coming storm. The floor groaned beneath their feet, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he instinctively gripped his rifle tighter. They're here, the woman said again, this time with more urgency in her voice. The stranger at the desk stood abruptly, knocking over a pile of maps. His eyes were wide, scanning the room with growing panic. It's them, he muttered under his breath. The exiles. They found us. Daniel felt his stomach lurch. He had barely gotten a handle on the idea that the world was teetering on the edge of collapse, and now this, them. The exiles. The ones who had corrupted whatever was left of humanity. Outside, the low rumble grew louder, and this time, Daniel could hear the unmistakable sound of boots crunching on the dry ground. Heavy. Determined. Closing in. The woman moved first, ducking down behind a table and grabbing a small duffel bag. She pulled out a handful of weapons, knives, handguns, and even a few makeshift explosives. Daniel's eyes widened. This was no ordinary station. This was a fortress, a place of survival, but it seemed the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Grab what you can, the woman said, tossing Daniel a pistol. They won't stop. They never stop. If we don't stand and fight, we'll die here. All of us. Daniel hesitated, looking at the gun in his hand. His entire life had been about surviving, not fighting, not killing. But there was no choice now. The exiles were on their way. And if they got inside? Without another word, Daniel shoved the pistol into his belt and followed the woman as she moved to the far wall, pushing aside a large metal panel that revealed a narrow stairwell leading down into the basement. We're going underground, the man at the desk said, his voice strained. He quickly began gathering what few supplies were left, slinging a large bag over his shoulder. They know where we are now. We won't last long up here. The woman didn't wait for him. She descended the stairs, disappearing into the darkness below. Daniel followed, his mind racing. How had the exiles found them? Had they been tracking the broadcasts? Had they known about Station 47 all along? The basement was dimly lit only by the flicker of a few weak light bulbs hanging from the ceiling. It was cramped, with shelves stacked high with cans, water bottles, and other supplies. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of stale food and old machinery. Get ready, the woman said, her voice cold as she grabbed a few more weapons from a shelf. She checked them one by one, ensuring everything was loaded and ready. Her eyes flicked back to Daniel, hard and unblinking. We're going to need every bullet we can get. The man reached the bottom of the stairs just as the first sounds of banging echoed from above. Footsteps, heavy and unrelenting, shook the station's upper floors. They're here, he muttered grimly, lowering himself to one knee to adjust his weapon. How many are there? Daniel asked, his voice tight. Too many, the woman replied. We won't be able to hold them off for long. If we don't make it down to the lower level, we're dead. Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline flood his veins. He didn't want to die here, not after everything he had gone through. Not when there was still a glimmer of hope in reaching whatever it was that Station 47 had promised. Footsteps grew louder. Someone, or something, was coming down the stairs. The woman tensed, her gun ready, but she motioned for Daniel to stay quiet. They couldn't let them know they were still down here. The door above them creaked. It was only a matter of time before the exiles found the basement. They're on the move, the man said. We don't have much time. The basement felt colder now, the air thick with tension. Daniel's breathing was shallow, his mind caught in a haze of fear and uncertainty. He had never been in a real fight before, not like this. The undead were one thing, slow, predictable, mindless. But these were people. They were living, breathing, and they knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't just trying to survive. They were hunting. Suddenly, the woman crouched low, signaling for everyone to remain silent. Her eyes were sharp, alert. Then, without warning, she bolted toward the back wall of the basement, grabbing a large, rusty lever and pulling it downward. A loud mechanical whine filled the air as a hidden door slid open, revealing a narrow tunnel leading deep underground. The woman shot a glance toward Daniel, motioning him to follow. "Move," she hissed. "Now." Daniel didn't hesitate. He scrambled after her, the man at the desk following close behind. They moved through the dark tunnel, the faint light of flashlights illuminating the way forward. The sounds of the exiles grew louder from above, but now, they were far behind them. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the earth, away from the station, away from the chaos. But Daniel didn't feel relief. Not yet. The woman led them down the narrow path, her steps swift and calculated. There was no time to waste. Whatever lay at the end of this tunnel was their only chance of survival. The man didn't speak, but his eyes were focused ahead, as if he already knew what was coming. There was no going back now. Daniel glanced over his shoulder one last time as they rounded a corner, but the only thing he saw was the darkness closing in behind them. And in that darkness, the sound of footsteps echoed, growing louder. The tunnel grew colder the deeper they went. The air was damp, filled with the scent of earth and something metallic. Daniel's footsteps echoed loudly in the narrow passage, the faint light of the flashlight he carried illuminating only a few feet ahead of him. His heart was still pounding from the tension of the chase. Every sound around him seemed amplified, the distant rumble of the exiles above, the drip of water from the walls, the quick breaths of the group ahead. The woman moved like a shadow, her face unreadable in the dim light. The man from the station was a few steps behind, his pace hurried but controlled. "We're almost there," the woman said, her voice low and steady, though there was an edge of urgency to it. "Just stay close." Daniel's mind was racing. What was this place they were heading to? And why had they gone through all this trouble to escape, only to descend into a dark, uncharted underground network? He had to know more. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman didn't answer immediately, but her pace quickened. The further they moved, the darker it became. The flashlight's beam flickered briefly before steadied again, casting long shadows along the tunnel's walls. The silence between them was oppressive, broken only by their footsteps. "We're heading to a place called the Pit," the man answered instead, his voice tight as he hurried to catch up. "It's an old safe house. A bunker, really. The exiles know about it, but it's one of the few places left that's still secure, mostly." "The Pit?" Daniel asked, brows furrowed. He had heard the name before, but it was a whispered rumor, something spoken of in hushed tones among the few remaining survivors. No one knew what it really was. Just that it was a place of refuge for those who dared to survive. "The exiles aren't the only problem," the man continued, his voice strained. "We've got other things down here. Worse things." Daniel's stomach churned. Worse things? What could be worse than the exiles? The infected were bad enough, but these survivors, these predators, were a whole different kind of danger. And now, it seemed like the underground world they were descending into was just as treacherous. The woman led them to a heavy metal door at the end of the tunnel, a door so rusted and weathered it looked like it had been abandoned for years. She didn't hesitate. With a grunt, she shoved a lever, and the door creaked open, revealing a vast, dark cavern beyond. The flickering light from their flashlights barely touched the edges of the space. "Welcome to the Pit," she said grimly, stepping through the doorway. "Home sweet home." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't sure if this place could be considered home, or if he wanted it to be. But there was no turning back now. He stepped through the threshold, into the unknown. Inside, the atmosphere was different from what Daniel had expected. The pit wasn't a bunker in the traditional sense. It was a labyrinth of chambers, each one carved into the rock like a hidden underground city. The walls were lined with crude shelters, makeshift beds, and piles of supplies, canned food, water bottles, and weapons, everywhere he looked. But there was something about it that felt off. The air was thick with tension, and the murmur of voices echoed faintly through the tunnels. The people down here didn't look like survivors, they looked like ghosts, shadows of what they once were, their eyes hollow and weary. This place, Daniel trailed off, his voice faltering. Not what you expected, huh? The man spoke from behind him. It's not a paradise, if that's what you're hoping for. The pit is a refuge for those who have nowhere else to go. But that doesn't mean it's safe. Daniel nodded slowly. He could feel it now, the sense of unease, the pressure in the air. Something wasn't right. The people here were survivors, yes. But they weren't just surviving. They were hiding. The woman led them deeper into the cavern, past rows of makeshift rooms, until they reached a large central chamber. Here, the light from the flashlights illuminated more clearly. The walls were covered in graffiti, crude symbols, and warnings. There were maps pinned to the walls, some marked with red XS, others with strange notations in languages Daniel didn't recognize. The place looked like a war zone, one that had been fought for far too long. Stay close, the woman said. We're not alone down here. Daniel swallowed hard. He had heard the rumors, but now they were more than just stories, they were real. And he was standing in the middle of it. We've been down here for months, the man said, his voice quiet now, almost regretful. The exiles know this place exists. They'll come eventually. And they'll bring hell with them. A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the dim light. It was a man, tall and gaunt, his face covered in a thick beard. His eyes were sharp, calculating, as he locked eyes with Daniel. This is Yerrick, the woman said, introducing him with a slight nod. He runs the pit. If you're going to make it down here, you'll need to talk to him. Yerrick didn't smile. He didn't even acknowledge Daniel beyond a brief glance. His attention was on the woman, and when he spoke, it was with a voice rough from disuse. We have a situation, Yerrick said bluntly. The exiles found our supply drop. They're closing in, and we don't have enough food or ammunition to fight them off. The air in the room grew tense as the group took in his words. The pit wasn't just a refuge. It was a battleground. And there were no guarantees here. Is there any way out? Daniel asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Jarek's gaze hardened. The only way out is to fight. And right now, we're all just holding on until we can't anymore. Before Daniel could respond, a loud crash echoed from deeper within the tunnels. The walls shook, dust falling from the ceiling. And then, a voice, distant, but unmistakable, carried through the air. They're here. The exiles had arrived. The sound of the exiles' arrival was unmistakable. The walls of the pit seemed to shudder under the weight of their footsteps, their presence felt long before they came into view. The air was thick with fear, the tension in the central chamber palpable as Daniel's hand instinctively went to the pistol at his belt. His mind raced, how had they found the pit so quickly? Had they been tracking them this whole time? Jarek's eyes flicked to the others, his expression grim. We have minutes. Maybe less. The woman beside Daniel tightened her grip on her rifle, her face set in a mask of steely resolve. We've got one shot at this. If they breach the tunnels, there's nowhere left to run. Where are we going to fight? Daniel asked, looking around the cavern. The central chamber was too exposed. If the exiles came down here, they would be sitting ducks. Yerrick gave a sharp nod. Follow me. Without another word, he turned and led them through a series of winding corridors, the passageways getting smaller and narrower as they ventured deeper into the heart of the pit. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath them seemed to vibrate with the approaching danger. They'll come through the main tunnel, Yerrick explained as they moved. We've set up a choke point further down. It's our only chance to slow them down long enough to get everyone to safety. Everyone? Daniel repeated, his voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. You mean, you're not planning to fight? Jarek's face was hard, unreadable. There's no victory down here, kid. We're outnumbered. Outgunned. Our best bet is to buy time and get the civilians out before the exiles flood in. If we can make it to the surface, we'll have a chance. Daniel's chest tightened. The idea of retreating, of running from the fight, was against everything he had fought for. But Jarek's eyes were cold with experience, and in those eyes, Daniel saw something he hadn't seen before: resignation. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to exist, to keep living in a world where life was no longer guaranteed. They reached the choke point, a narrow, crumbling passageway lined with rusted pipes and old machinery. It was a dead end, with only a few possible routes of escape. The woman and the man from the station took position along the walls, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning every shadow. The air was thick with anticipation, a buzzing tension that only grew as the distant sound of boots on stone grew louder. Get ready, Jarek said, his voice low. When they come, don't hesitate. We fight until we can't. Daniel's heart was pounding in his chest. He hadn't fought real people before, not like this. Not like the exiles. He wasn't prepared for this kind of battle. The infected, he knew how to handle them. They were predictable, relentless in their hunger, but these people, they were calculated, strategic. The woman beside him caught his eye. Stay close. Stick together. We've got this. Daniel nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. He didn't have this. He barely even knew how to use the gun at his side. But there was no turning back now. The exiles were here, and there was only one way out of this mess. A low growl of noise echoed through the tunnel, and suddenly, the distant sound of shuffling footsteps became clearer, sharper. The exiles were close. Jarek raised his hand, signaling for them to quiet. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, crash. The first exile came into view, his silhouette dark against the dim light of the passage. He was tall, with wild, unkempt hair, a dirty bandana wrapped around his head. His eyes glinted with malice, and his mouth was twisted into a cruel smile. Well, well, he said, his voice low and mocking. Looks like we've found ourselves a little hideaway. His comrades emerged from the shadows, a group of 5 or 6 heavily armed individuals, their faces hidden behind scarves, gas masks, and dirty clothes. They moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing they had all the power. They were predators. And Daniel and the others were the prey. Get down! Jarek hissed, pushing Daniel to the floor just as the exiles raised their weapons. Bullets whizzed past them, ricocheting off the stone walls. The narrow tunnel made it difficult to move quickly, but the exiles didn't care. They were closing in. The woman fired first, a shot ringing out and striking one of the exiles in the chest. He fell back with a loud grunt, but it didn't slow the others down. Another exile raised a crossbow, firing a bolt that narrowly missed Daniel's head. The impact sent a tremor through the ground as it embedded in the wall beside him. They were trapped. The walls were too narrow, the passageway too tight to maneuver. There was no room to breathe, no room to think. Fall back! Jarek shouted. To the second line. They scrambled to their feet, racing through the tight corridors, firing back as they went. Daniel's pulse was pounding in his ears, his hands shaking around the gun. He wasn't sure if he was hitting anything. It didn't matter. Every step felt like it could be his last. The group reached the second line, another choke point where the remaining survivors had set up a barricade made of broken pipes and debris. The exiles were right on their heels. A voice from the other side of the barricade shouted to get ready. Don't let them through. The voice was a woman's, strong, authoritative. The exiles charged. But just as they reached the barricade, a blast rang out, a deafening, thunderous roar of gunfire. It was followed by a series of smaller explosions, sending dust and rock tumbling from the ceiling. The tunnel shook, and for a split second, the world seemed to stand still. The exiles faltered, confusion in their eyes. But before they could react, more gunfire erupted from the darkness, and the survivors of the pit opened fire from their position behind the barricade. They were holding them off, for now. Daniel's breath was ragged, his heart still hammering in his chest. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But in this moment, the exiles had been pushed back, just enough to give them a fleeting chance at survival. And that was all they had left. The barricade trembled under the force of another impact. The exiles were relentless, their screams echoing through the tunnel, blending with the sound of shattering stone and crumbling metal. The survivors had bought themselves a moment, but Daniel knew it wouldn't last. They were cornered, and there was nowhere to run. He crouched behind the makeshift wall, heart pounding, eyes scanning the dark passages around them. The air felt thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. His palms were slick with sweat, fingers shaking around the grip of his weapon. He wasn't used to this, being in the heat of battle. Survival had always been a quieter, more solitary affair. But this was war. "Hold your ground," Yarrick shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He crouched beside Daniel, a look of determination in his eyes. "We've got one more chance. If we can make it to the escape tunnel, we can reach the surface. There's a way out, but only if we can buy enough time." Daniel's eyes flicked to the woman, who was reloading her rifle with practiced ease, her face a mask of focus. She met his gaze, a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps the same doubt he felt, but there was no time to process it. "Are we seriously just going to run?" Daniel asked, his voice low but urgent. "I mean, after everything we've been through, we're just going to turn tail and run?" The woman didn't respond immediately. Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight. "There's no victory in staying and dying for nothing," she said, her words clipped, almost as if she had said them 1,000 times before. "We get to the surface, and we live to fight another day. That's the only option left." Yarrick leaned forward, glancing over his shoulder toward the distant sounds of the exiles regrouping. "The second they get through this barricade, we'll be surrounded. We don't have the firepower to keep them back much longer. We fight our way to the escape tunnel, and we make it to the surface." Daniel nodded grimly, his stomach a knot of anxiety. The escape tunnel was their only hope. But deep down, something gnawed at him. Something about this plan felt off. They were running into the unknown, trusting that whatever awaited them above ground was better than what they had in the pit. "Ready?" Yarrick asked, his eyes scanning the group. The woman gave a sharp nod, slinging her rifle over her shoulder. She was calm, cold. The man from the station, too, stood with his weapon drawn, his face pale but resolute. Together, they were a unit, scarred, battle-weary, but unified by the desperate need to survive. The moment stretched on, each second thick with the sound of approaching footsteps and the echo of distant screams. Then, Yarrick's hand shot up. "Move!" Without another word, the group sprang into action. They darted through the narrow tunnel, their boots pounding against the ground as they raced toward the escape route. The faint flicker of light ahead promised a way out, a sliver of hope in the suffocating darkness. Behind them, the barricade fell. The exiles were coming. The tunnel was long, twisting and winding, but Yarrick knew the way. He led the group through the dark corridors, down another set of stairs that seemed to descend even further into the earth. The deeper they went, the more claustrophobic the tunnel became, the walls pressing in around them, the air thick and heavy with stale earth and moisture. Then, they reached it. The escape tunnel. A large steel door, rusted and covered in vines, stood in front of them, and Daniel could see that the hinges were already half broken. The door had been sealed for years. But there was a way through. The woman stepped forward, her fingers moving quickly as she began to pry open the door. The metallic groan of the door grinding against its frame was deafening in the silence. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her jaw set in concentration. "Come on," she muttered, pulling harder. "Come on." The pounding of feet grew louder from behind them, and Daniel felt his breath quicken. The exiles weren't far off. They could hear them now, shouting, banging on the walls, getting closer and closer. "Get it open!" Daniel shouted, panic rising in his chest. "I'm trying," the woman snapped, her voice sharp. She yanked again, and this time, the door creaked open, just enough for them to slip through. "Go!" Yerrick barked. One by one, they squeezed through the gap, Daniel going last. As soon as he passed through, the woman slammed the door shut behind him, the sound of metal scraping against metal reverberating through the dark passage. They were in. For now. The escape tunnel was a narrow, claustrophobic path that led them up through the rock. Daniel could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as they climbed, the air becoming thinner with each step. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't safe yet, that something was waiting for them above ground. "We're almost there," Yerrick said, his voice tight, his eyes scanning the tunnel ahead. "Just a little farther." As they ascended, the air grew colder, the dampness of the earth giving way to the crispness of the night air. And then, they reached the top. Yerrick pushed a large stone aside, revealing a hatch above them. The surface. Freedom. The woman went first, pushing open the hatch and climbing out into the night. One by one, the group followed, Daniel last. When he emerged into the night, he squinted against the sudden brightness of the moonlight, his breath sharp in his chest. They were free, but the world above was no better than the hell they'd just escaped. The landscape was barren, stretching out before them, desolate, empty. The sky above was a swirling mass of dark clouds, threatening rain. Far in the distance, Daniel could see the silhouettes of ruined cities. The world was a wasteland, no longer the place it once had been. But it was still alive. For now. The woman stood in front of him, looking out at the ruined horizon. "We're not done yet," she said softly. "But we're still breathing." Daniel nodded. He didn't know what the future held, what the exiles would do next, or if they'd ever be safe again. But in this moment, as the wind howled through the empty landscape, he realized something. They had made it. Against all odds, they had survived. And that was enough. For now. The end.